Thank you, Mr. Chair. We certainly have work to do to overcome the dark, sordid past of suppressing voting in the United States. Poll taxes, literacy tests, use of the grandfather clause, women being denied the right to vote, citizens who've attempted to vote. We have work to do to overcome this horrible history. And like the District of Columbia, my home state of Vermont has been working hard to make sure that we implement common sense strategies to make sure every eligible voter can vote. And one of those strategies is allowing same-day voter registration. So, Ms. Weiser, does same-day voter registration increase the number of eligible voters participating in our elections?
Yes, it does. There are a long string of studies that show that it increases voter participation from as much as from 3 to 9%.
And is there any indication that same-day voter registration increases voter fraud?
There is no evidence of increase in voter fraud in states that have same-day registration. Their voter fraud rates are just as low as those in the rest of the country.
Can you say that one more time? Because I think this is really, really important.
Yes, there is no factual connection between same-day registration and increased voter fraud that has been demonstrated or anywhere in the country.
So when a state like Vermont or District of Columbia makes a decision that one of the most important things that we can do as elected officials is to make sure anyone who is legally able to vote is easily able to vote, that is something that we should all be striving for, correct? I mean, we should be wanting more people to vote, not restricting people who are eligible to vote from voting.
I agree with that. And I should note that the states that do have same-day registration have multiple layers of protection in place to ensure that it doesn't increase any risk of voter fraud.
That's right. You know, one of the other things I was sitting here thinking about is that, you know, when you look at what's going on right now in this hearing and the issues that people of color have had to face throughout our history and are still facing just in being able to cast legal ballots, it's similar to the struggles that rural voters have had as well. And as a former middle school teacher, I think a lot about the students that I've had over the years that have been born into rural poverty in my state and may be born into a family that doesn't have a high level of education. And I was, in preparation for this hearing, I did some digging into the numbers, and over 18 million Americans who did not complete high school or only have a high school diploma do not have a driver's license. These are the people that are going to be turned away to vote because they do not have an ID. And so, as my colleague Max Frost just said, it is about restricting people from voting, whether they are people of color, whether they are the poor, whether they are rural voters who do not have a high income or educational level of attainment. And I can't understand why this is such a focus of my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle to prevent Americans who are legally eligible to vote from voting. And can you help me understand this? What's going on here?
So, you know, I do support reasonable and non-discriminatory ID requirements. Americans should certainly have to demonstrate they are who they say they are. But what we are seeing and what has been raising significant concerns are these overly restrictive ID requirements, like what you're talking about, requiring people to show a driver's license to vote in a jurisdiction where large numbers of people don't have driver's licenses that many Americans don't have. And that risks disenfranchising huge swaths of the population. By our earlier research, up to 11% of Americans, and that is disproportionately in voters of color, voters with disability, elderly voters, young voters.
And so, you know, my understanding is adults, make sure I get this right, adults who earn less than $30,000 a year are 5 times more likely not to have a driver's license than somebody that earns over $100,000 or more.
Right.
I think it's really clear what's going on here, and I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired.